All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to trace one of the most incredible stories out there, a real fall from grace. We're talking about a man who had everything. He was a prince in the most powerful empire in the world. And then he lost it all, becoming a fugitive on the run. This is the story of the making of Moses.
And this one line, it really just says it all, doesn't it? It gets right to the core conflict that shaped the whole first half of his life. I mean, can you imagine? You're raised in the absolute splendor of Pharaoh's court, but deep down, you know you were born a Hebrew, a member of a people who are literally enslaved. That's the double life, the dual identity that would eventually force him to make a choice that would change everything.
So, this brings us to the first major chapter of his life, the prince with a divided heart. At this point, Moses is staring down a massive choice. And it's not just about what kind of life he wants to lead, it's about what kind of person he wants to be. And the two options couldn't be more different. I mean, look at this. On one side, he could just keep living this life of power, of influence as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. But on the other, he could choose a life of suffering, of affliction with the people of God. And the book of Hebrews is so clear on this. He consciously, actively refused that first path and chose the second.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is some rebellious young guy making a rash decision. But it wasn't, not at all. The book of Acts actually tells us he was 40 years old when this happened, a fully grown man, totally established in Egyptian society. He knew exactly what he was giving up and what he was walking into.
And this wasn't just some internal philosophical change. It was a change in action. He didn't just feel bad for his people from the safety of the palace. No, the scripture says he deliberately went out unto his brethren. He went to see their suffering for himself, to truly look on their burdens. He was all in.
So he makes this huge choice to identify with his people, and things go sideways fast. He seems convinced that he's their destined deliverer, and he decides to, force the issue. And this leads to a pretty fateful, violent moment.
The book of Exodus just lays it out, step by step. First, he sees this terrible injustice, an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. Then he snaps. He takes action, violent action, and kills the Egyptian. And finally, he tries to cover it up, burying the body in the sand. It was impulsive, it was secretive, and this one act was about to bring his entire life in Egypt crashing down.
This is the gut punch. The very next day, Moses tries to break up a fight between two Hebrews, and instead of them seeing him as a hero, he gets hit with this question: who made you a prince and a judge over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian? Oof, his secret is out. And the very people he was trying to save not only reject him, but they throw his own violence right back in his face.
So being rejected by his own people was devastating. But it was about to get so much worse. That secret crime? Yeah, not a secret for long. The news travels, and it travels all the way to the top, to Pharaoh himself. This forces Moses to run for his life.
And just like that, in an instant, the prince becomes a fugitive. Pharaoh, the man he probably grew up with in the palace, now wants him dead. His life in Egypt is over. There's no going back. His only choice is to run.
You really can't overstate what a massive fall from grace this was. Just try to picture it. You're trading the lush, green banks of the Nile for the empty, harsh desolation of the wilderness. You're swapping a palace for a life on the run, with nothing but a death sentence hanging over your head.
But his story doesn't just end there in the desert. Actually, this desperate flight into the wilderness is the totally unexpected start of a brand new chapter, as he ends up finding refuge in a place called Midian.
His new life starts, of all places, at a well. And that old instinct he has to protect the vulnerable, it kicks in again when he defends a group of young women from some aggressive shepherds. And that one act of courage, well, it leads to an invitation to stay, which leads to a new home, and eventually a new family, when he marries one of the women, Zipporah.
And when his first son is born, Moses gives him the name Gershom. The name itself is like this constant reminder of his situation. It literally means a stranger there. So even though he's found a new family, a new life, he's still very much in exile, a stranger in a strange land. So what was going on during all this time, this long exile? It would be so easy to look at it as just a time of failure, him just hiding out, waiting. But the story frames these decades as something way more intentional. It was his wilderness classroom.
I mean, just think about this transformation. This is a man who was trained in the courts of power, an expert in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and now he's a humble shepherd. His whole world shrinks from the politics of a global empire to the simple needs of a flock of sheep. He's not worried about statecraft anymore. He's just worried about finding pasture and water.
And you know what? This simple life taught him everything that the palace never could. Out there, he learned humility, which he needed to counter the pride of being a prince. He learned patience from the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons. And maybe most importantly, he learned how to actually care for and lead the vulnerable. Not with a prince's sword, but with a shepherd's staff.
And this is where the story gives us this incredible, stunning symmetry. How long was he out there as a shepherd? 40 years. The exact same amount of time he spent living as a prince in Egypt. It's like 40 years learning power, followed by 40 years learning humility. Two equal halves of an education, and he needed both.
It almost makes you think of that verse from Proverbs. It suggests there's a much bigger purpose at play here. While Moses was out there learning to be a shepherd, God was orchestrating everything. His fall from the palace, his long years in exile, that wasn't an accident. It was an appointment. It was all part of a divine plan to forge the man who would one day lead God's people.
So what this all means is that his escape from Egypt wasn't the end of his calling at all. It was actually the start of his real training. The palace gave him an education, for sure, but it was the wilderness that forged his character. He needed both to become the deliverer he was always meant to be.
And that just leaves us with this final thought to chew on. Moses' 40 years in the wilderness must have felt like a massive detour, right? Just this long, quiet, maybe even boring period of waiting. But looking back, it was the most important preparation he ever had. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? When has a period of waiting in your own life actually turned out to be a period of training?